Imagine pouring your heart into a relationship, believing it's forever, only to discover it's built on lies. That was me. Bianca wasn't just my love. She was my anchor, my constant. But behind that radiant smile hid secrets that shattered everything. It started small, guarded glances, late-night texts, and excuses that didn't quite add up. At first, I ignored it, thinking I was overreacting. But when the truth surfaced, everything unraveled in a storm of betrayal and heartbreak. What followed wasn't just the fallout of her deception, but a journey I never expected. One of painful confrontations, public consequences, and ultimately, a strength I didn't know I had. The beginning was like something out of a dream. Bianca and I fit together effortlessly. Her laughter lit up my darkest days, and every word she spoke felt like a promise etched in stone. I'd often catch myself wondering if life could truly be this flawless. We built our world on shared dreams and whispered vows of loyalty, her warm assurances anchoring my faith in us. Yet, looking back now, I see that even perfection casts shadows if you know where to look. Our moments together were magnetic, but cracks began to form, small ones at first. A hurried glance at her phone when I entered the room. Unfinished sentences whenever I asked about her day. It's amazing how much silence can say when you're tuned into its frequency. Back then, I dismissed it, convincing myself that love meant trust. But love, I learned, also sharpens your instincts. The closer we got, the more distant she became. Bianca's words were sweet, but they carried a faint bitterness I couldn't shake. I started noticing changes, subtle, yet undeniable. And though I couldn't put my finger on it, a seed of doubt took root, its tendrils wrapping tightly around my thoughts. Something was off. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Bianca had always been private, so her reluctance to share her phone seemed harmless, or so I tried to believe. But as days turned into weeks, her behavior shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. Late-night texts that she claimed were just work, sudden, unexplained errands. And the way her tone grew sharper, like every question I asked was a test she didn't want to take. I started noticing patterns. The way her laughter felt forced when she was around me, but came effortlessly when she glanced at her screen. Her excuses became rehearsed, too polished to feel genuine. She once left for a quick coffee with an old friend and came back hours later with no coffee in sight. It was a small thing, but small things have a way of adding up. I wanted to confront her, but every time I tried, doubt crept in, whispering that I was overreacting. I didn't want to be the jealous partner, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Those lingering glances, those half-truths, they gnawed at me. And though I didn't know it yet, this was just the beginning. I never imagined myself as the type to snoop, but sometimes, doubt makes you do things you'd never consider. Late one night, while Bianca was asleep, I sat in the living room, replaying her odd behavior in my head like a broken record. My heart raced as I decided to do something I had sworn I'd never do. Check her online activity. I told myself it was just to put my mind at ease, but deep down, I feared the truth. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. A flurry of messages with a name I recognized. A guy she once called just an old friend. The timestamps told their own story. Messages exchanged at hours when no one should be catching up. My stomach tightened as I scrolled further, seeing inside jokes and flirty emojis that felt like daggers to my chest. Suddenly, her hesitations and evasions made cruel sense. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention, gathering details like a detective piecing together a case. My suspicions turned into certainty, but with that came a new question. What was I going to do with this knowledge? The pain was unbearable, but the need for clarity kept me going. Little did she know, her secrets were no longer hers alone. The decision to confront her wasn't easy, but the weight of her betrayal was too much to carry alone. I planned it carefully, choosing a setting that felt almost poetic, public enough to ensure she couldn't deny the truth, yet intimate enough to make the moment unforgettable. A cozy corner of her favorite restaurant seemed perfect, though the irony of the place being her favorite didn't escape me. She sat across from me, smiling as if everything was normal, her phone resting on the table like a taunt. My heart pounded as I spoke, my voice trembling just enough to betray the storm inside. "Bianca," I said, "is there anything you want to tell me?" Her smile faltered, her eyes flicking toward her phone before meeting mine. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone all innocence, but I could see the cracks forming. Before she could weave another excuse, I laid it out. Every message, every late-night call, every damning piece of evidence. Her face turned pale, her words stumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to explain. Just as she started to speak, a familiar face entered the restaurant room. The air between us grew electric, the tension thick enough to suffocate. And in that moment, everything unraveled. The fallout began almost immediately. Bianca's carefully curated persona, her sweet, relatable charm that had earned her so many followers, crumbled before my eyes. Someone at the restaurant had recorded the confrontation. By the next morning, the video was everywhere, accompanied by screenshots of her messages and damning captions that left no room for doubt. Her double life, once a secret, had become the internet's favorite scandal. Her followers, who once adored her for her authenticity, turned on her in droves. Comments flooded her posts, calling her a fraud, a hypocrite. Brands she worked with quietly distanced themselves, removing her face from their campaigns. She posted a vague apology, filled with half-truths and deflections, but it only fueled the fire. The cracks in her reputation had become an avalanche, burying everything she had worked so hard to build. Watching it all unfold was surreal. A part of me felt vindicated. After all, the truth was finally out. But another part of me couldn't ignore the emptiness it left behind. Her downfall didn't undo the pain she caused me. It didn't rebuild the trust she shattered. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what would come next for both of us. The aftermath was a whirlwind, and Bianca wasn't the only one caught in the storm. Her professional life, once so polished and enviable, spiraled out of control. Contracts were terminated overnight. Her inbox flooded with cold rejections instead of brand deals. Even the companies that tried to stay neutral faced backlash, their audiences demanding accountability for associating with someone so untrustworthy. Personally, she wasn't faring much better. Friends who once rallied around her disappeared when her facade fell. Even her family seemed distant, their disappointment evident in the clipped tones of their rare interactions. As for the other man, his involvement became public too. Rumors swirled that he had lost his job after the scandal went viral. Their shared disgrace seemed to unite them, though not in the way they might have hoped. For me, it was a strange kind of justice to witness. But as satisfying as it was to see the consequences unfold, it wasn't without its complications. People started recognizing me in public, strangers approaching to commend me for exposing the truth. I wasn't looking for fame, just closure. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever truly feel at peace with everything that had happened. I thought her silence meant acceptance, but I underestimated how far desperation could push someone. Bianca didn't fade into the background as I expected. Instead, she lashed out, her anger simmering beneath a thin veil of control. It started with petty jabs online, cryptic posts about fake people, and how the truth always comes out. Subtle, but I knew they were meant for me. Then, her actions became more erratic. One evening, I came home to find my car vandalized, keyed from end to end, tires slashed. I didn't need proof to know it was her. The message was clear. A few days later, she showed up at my workplace, demanding to talk. Her voice was loud enough to draw stares, her words laced with accusations that made me seem like the villain. It was chaos, and I was losing patience. Our final confrontation was explosive. She showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door as though her life depended on it. I let her in, if only to stop the scene she was creating. "Why did you do this to me?" she demanded, her tears blurring the anger in her voice. I stared at her, struggling to reconcile this person with the Bianca I once knew. And in that moment, I realized I had to take action to protect what was left of my peace. After that night, I knew I couldn't let things escalate further. Her vandalism and public outbursts weren't just reckless. They were crossing legal lines. With the help of a close friend, I documented everything. The damage to my car, the messages she left on my door, and even the confrontation she staged. It was painful to involve the law, but I needed boundaries, and more importantly, I needed peace. Filing the lawsuit felt surreal, as if I were detangling myself from a nightmare that had gone on too long. My friend, who witnessed her behavior firsthand, agreed to testify. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. The court ordered her to pay for the damages and issued a restraining order. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of control returning to my life. Bianca's reaction, however, was just as dramatic as I'd expected. Her pleas for forgiveness turned into defiance, and she painted herself as the victim online. But her words no longer held the sway they once did. People had seen too much, and her cries for sympathy fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild, piece by piece, determined to leave this chaos behind me for good. The internet doesn't forget, and Bianca learned that the hard way. The scandal rippled far beyond our small circle, becoming a cautionary tale about trust and authenticity. Articles were written, reaction videos popped up, and even memes began circulating. The once praised influencer became a symbol of hypocrisy, her carefully curated image shattered beyond repair. But not all the reactions were harsh. A small group of her followers rallied to defend her, insisting that she deserved a second chance. Bianca, ever the strategist, tried to lean into the narrative of redemption. She posted tearful videos about learning from mistakes and how nobody is perfect. Some believed her, but most saw through the act, especially when her sincerity was undermined by the same manipulative tendencies she was accused of. As for me, I stayed silent. The world was loud enough without my voice adding to the chaos. The attention was overwhelming at first, but it eventually faded, leaving me with a strange kind of peace. This wasn't the closure I'd expected, but in a way, it was liberating. People had moved on, the world had moved on, and slowly I realized so had I. Letting go wasn't easy. The pain lingered like an old wound, but over time, it began to dull. I started focusing on myself, rediscovering the pieces of me I'd neglected during the chaos. Hobbies I'd abandoned found their way back into my life. Books that had gathered dust, friends I hadn't seen in months, and moments of quiet that felt like healing. Each step forward reminded me that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. Bianca remained a shadow in the background, her name occasionally popping up online, but it didn't sting the way it used to. Her chapter in my life was over, and I refused to keep rereading it. What I'd been through had left scars, yes, but they also became reminders of lessons I wouldn't forget, about trust, self-respect, and the importance of walking away when something no longer serves you. Eventually, I stopped looking back altogether. A new sense of clarity settled over me, and with it came a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal that once defined me had become just another story, one that no longer held power over my future. I was ready to turn the page and write something new, this time on my own terms.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.